Testing.
We're going to start, Mike. The speakers are still lousy. You still need to. All right. Welcome to the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of April 19th. And we respectfully acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish and Nuu-Chah-Nulth people, and we offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their care for the earth, their teachings about our earth, and we hope we are able to respectfully bring those teachings to the work we do in this committee and make good decisions for the community for the future. So with that, could I have I think we have something to add to the agenda, actually. Director Acton, did you have something?
One new business item, a grant and aid.
Grant and aid. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda with the grant and aid added? And seconded, and all in favor? Motion's carried. So we have one person, one director, McClinton, remote. Wave if I, just jump in if I forget about you. And then moving on.
So the second item on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes from the Electoral Area Services Committee of meeting of April 5th, 2023. And the recommendation is for adoption of the minutes. So.
Do I have a mover and a seconder? Anything missing from the minutes? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion's carried.
The next item on the agenda is business arising from the minutes, and there's nothing under that heading, and so we're on to the public input period. I don't have any participants for public input online, so it would just be in the gallery.
I welcome anyone in the gallery who would like to come up and provide up to 3 minutes of input to us at the beginning of the meeting. Please step up to the mic and press the button so that it turns red. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
And state your name and what you're speaking to. Thank you.
My name is Carrie Talbot. I'm a resident of Area D, Cowichan Bay, and I'm speaking to item R4, Parks and Trails Division of the Wessex to, or Pritchard to Wessex Ravine Staircase project that we had been trying for 10 years to acquire, and now suddenly a project or a plan has appeared, but it doesn't appear that it will, it appears it will fail, let's put it that way, with all the building that's got to be done in the ravine near the heron rookery. So I've been protecting the herons for more than 10 years. This trail is the last connector we have from upper Cowichan Bay, all the brand new homes, down to Pritchard Road, and it will allow residents to come down into the Wessex Ravine from the end of Pritchard Road to a trail we already own between the cannery and the Wessex Inn, out to our lovely Hecate Park and all that it has in there. So we've been trying to get this for some years, and I was a little discouraged to see it come after I'd quit my 15 years plus at Parks. And so what I want to say mostly is why it's so critical. People can walk without having to hold their children's hands to get safely down to the beach and the parks. And Cowichan Bay Village does not have any kind of a safe walking path through it. So I would love to see this plan not fail. And it could succeed. What I've written here to mitigate concerns voiced by Tracy Fleming of Cowichan Tribes is to source assessments that would have been done when the cannery was constructed. Modify the staircase design because it goes a little too far up the ravine for comfort as far as herons and other wildlife go. That ravine was acquired as parkland for a wildlife corridor. So we're trying to keep people from just going anywhere they want down in there to the end of the road and down. Tucked in on the east side, the herons are on the west side. Interpretive signage, volunteers to guide people, delineating some no-go zones. The herons are there for 5 months, and people live 12 months of the year around to access that place, the ravine, and out to the ocean. And plus visibility from the stairway would be limited considerably when the trees leaf out. It's all maple and alders in there. That's another way of mitigating any issues. So staff have recommended that this not go ahead, and also that we limit access to the ravine at the informal trail people have been using for many, many years. And I think we need to build the stairs, finally, get them in there, and guide people where they need to go and not back in the ravine with the wildlife.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Does anyone else like to make a comment? Please. Oh, two more people.
So I may be saying some of the things that Carrie Talbot has just said, and
Jane, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Jane Kilthey. I live at 1799 Pritchard Road, just half a block from Wessex Ravine, and I've lived there for 20 years. And I need to move this thing. So, like Carrie Talbot, I have been involved in the creation and the ongoing Estuary Nature Center and its programs and creating the Heron Cam and all of that over the past 12 years. And I'm still not doing very well with this. And I know I'm trying to limit my time, so I'm just going to read what I've written here.
Sure.
So, which means going over here. I've learned and cared about our herons for over 2 decades, including watching them relocate their nests from the upper to lower ravine 18 years ago after a developer cleared trees right up to the nesting herons, exposing them to predation. My daughter grew up watching the herons and is now a bird biologist with Canadian Wildlife Service. Discussions with CVRD I'm aware of, and with provincial biologists about the stairway to guide walkers down the east side of Wessex Ravine to Cowichan Bay Road have been going on for the whole 18 years that the herons have been there. The east side of the ravine is a good distance from the trees on the west side where the herons nest. The stairs, and I looked at the map and the scale in the report from Swell. The stairs will start 80 meters from their nests and will reach the ravine floor 50 to 60 meters from any nests. The stairs will make it both easier and safer for families to walk down to the two parks on the water and to the village, and they will make it safer for the herons because people on the stairs will be on the far side of the ravine, and when the trees are not in leaf, they'll be visible, and the herons will recognize them as humans even when the trees are in leaf. And those herons are, and have been because of the closeness of the subdivision, acclimated to humans. And every evidence of being around them is that they consider us not a threat. This is hugely different from what happens now more often than we'd like to see, is that people bushwhack their own trails in the undergrowth, sometimes right under the heron's nests. And that, for a heron, is an indication that there might be a predator. So they're far more likely now to lift off from their nests, even at the risk of abandoning their nests if they think there are regular predators under them, because they can have a second clutch in another safer location later. And so in terms of keeping the herons there, this is a solution, the stairway, rather than a problem. And that's the real and current danger. And so creating those stairs is really going to help us. Last year I spoke to a biologist who called about our development permit area and the limitations on construction and other noise during the nesting season from mid-February to mid-August. And construction should not take place in this period. It should never have happened for the cannery. That means construction can be from mid-August, or most important, when the herons disperse from the heronry into the fall. And luckily we live in a climate where that's very possible. And luckily, the water main corridor where the stairs are planned requires very little clearing, with few trees of any size right near it. And as I heard Carrie mention, the leafing out of the trees will provide a good continued natural environment there. Clearing won't be needed near the heron's nest because of the distance they are from where the stairs are planned. Our neighborhood has waited for these stairs for years, to walk down to the water and the village through nature without traffic in a way that keeps the herons safe. I think that matters to most of us in the Pritchard Road neighborhood. The lack of sidewalks, and you've probably all heard this before, the lack of sidewalks in Cowichan Bay is especially problematic for parents wanting to walk their children to our parks and into the village. It's extra dicey walking down Wilmot Road's steep and curving hill, and many of the seniors who live in the community can't do that walk either. So some years ago, a lovely piece of forest on Pritchard Road was logged, again reducing nature access in our community. There's now a 22-unit condominium development nearing completion. Just imagine the number of new people in our neighborhood. And there's already a huge parking problem. And I've one more sentence. So stairs down the east side of the ravine will make it easier for us to all walk to the parks, the water, the village. Our new neighbors will see nesting herons at a safe distance and learn to care about them. We can put another shh, quiet for herons sign there. We can create educational brochures. We can provide nature interpretations. Please don't cancel this project. It's a win-win for birds and people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Good afternoon. Thanks for allowing the public to speak. My name is Frank Missick, and I'm not in support of the application on Hillbank Road. It used to be, well, I've been a resident right neighboring that property that has the application in for over 45 years. At one point in time, we used to know all our neighbors. Unfortunately, at times change, and we can see that rather than people coming as a retirement place, it's become a development place, and I think that's, you guys see that all day, every week, right? I just wanted to bring up a couple points that kind of are my concerns. We used to know the previous owner, Mr. and Mrs. Gibson. They've passed, but one of the things that he always wished for and almost had in place before the property was actually sold was a green covenant. He wanted to preserve all the trees and keep that property as it was with all the old growth forest there. So I really would feel that he would be rolling in his grave to see any development, even the quarry that has been there for the years that have been. One of my other concerns is the flow of water and the watershed and the water streams. The property is located on an elevation. The rock formation underneath there is bedrock. A lot of the water flows. We've experienced noticeably when some of the trees have been cut out already. The driveway that has been put in at the very end of Hillbank, we notice on very heavy rainfalls that water pools up, and that's just because the trees don't have the absorption. It's bedrock, and all of that water just flows down. We see it on the other end of the property on Gibson Road, where there's water that flows in the ditching, and it just goes down, 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 and there's farmers' fields and neighbors' fields that the water flows into. So that would be a concern that I'd have, as well as the dust. And this is obviously from the quarry, from the trucks that go through. You see a lot of dust that lingers and stays affixed to the greenery, the shrubbery that's along those roads. The other issues are the roads themselves. Hillbank Road used to be in decent shape because of all the traffic that has gone through, the heavy trucking and stuff like that. Because of the quarry that's been on there, the roads do need to be upgraded. There are cracks, and what I've noticed specifically is it's been so compressed that the trees that are on the sides, the roots now are shaping. It's in dire needs, I would say. Wildlife is another issue. We have bears that have migrated over from that property onto ours, hawks and even eagles. We notice the increase that they've been coming through. So I think with the development that's being proposed, that's even going to scatter the remaining there. And just other questionable practices and stuff like that as far as the development in the quarry. And just overall the neighbors, I feel, that have been promised certain things have always never been delivered as such. So make sure that the T's are dotted, or the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Nope.
Same talk. Jim Lambert, live right adjacent to this real estate development on Hillbank. 2 or 3 concerns right off the bat. Adjacency, the plan submitted isn't too wildly out of whack, but I'm mainly concerned about water issues, as in residential water availability. I've got a 300-foot deep well, and I'm right on the, I guess, the east or west, southwest side of that development. And we have marginal water supply. We always barely make it through every year, but we don't do any irrigation or anything. It's part of the same rock pile where this proposal is involved. The other thing, I guess, comes to mind, there is one part of this plan that shows a house within about 100 meters of my place, right above, which is, adjacency thing. The other one is a big one, is that this is going to be a kind of high-end approach, development. And what Mr. Missick said there, same thing. It's always been this rural, cool, I guess, residential thing, but we don't want to send it all of a sudden it becomes the Highlands in Victoria. That's a trend that can start when you start these things. All of a sudden, the real estate values go, "Bing," and all of us have been there a long time, really don't want to see our value, it's not the money thing. It's the taxes you pay every year. Surely we don't need more high-end luxury homes. We need more people, cheap real estate, not multi-million dollar developments. And that's, so that's a social issue that I look at. I mean, I think when I was 20, how would you buy a house now? Well, they definitely aren't, this development isn't going to solve that problem. So, what else? I'm not, the forestry zoning, I'm not against the beneficial owner having a beneficial use of his property, doing good forestry. I'm a forester, so I understand that, and you have to pay the taxes and do whatever you got to do. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Okay, that's pretty much everything I got to say. And the water thing is the big thing.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? We have time for one more.
Hi, my name is Rachel Sansom. I just wanted to speak briefly to item 8R2, the Hillbank. I'm the applicant for the proposal. And hello, neighbors. Nice to meet you.
The applicant has an opportunity when the thing is
Oh, okay.
presented.
I just wanted to make sure that I
Okay.
understood when I was allowed to speak. So I should wait until after the planner's presentation then. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
All right, let's move on. Sure. Make it quick.
Hi, my name's Rebecca Papadopoulos. I own Keating Farm just over in Glenora area. And I just wanted to say something really briefly. I wanted to first off say, that we appreciate the fact that this agricultural policy and regulations best practices document has been pulled together. Something that we had really identified in going through the official community planning effort is that we really feel like there's some pretty substantial kind of gaps in how agriculture is being addressed in those documents. And so I do think that this is going to create kind of a good opportunity in order to help build that part of the official community plan out. I am happy to see that it looks like this document is going to be put out for public review and comment over a 30-day period or so. That was something that I know I was concerned about when I had heard that this document was originally being drafted and that it would be incorporated directly into the OCP without possibly public consultation happening. So I'm glad to hear that that's the intention, is that document would be going out for some public review. Just so you know, like, we have met with Coralie and Allie and with a Julia Rylands, which is here today as well. We're currently working on getting a group of people together from the agricultural community to comment on the OCP and also to comment on this plan. Really, we feel like, at least based on our experience and our contacts within the agricultural community, there hasn't been enough engagement in that OCP process to date. A lot of folks haven't been attending the public meetings and other things that have played out. And so we're really trying to kind of work with folks in order to bring a group together to be able to get some really valuable input directly from our community. And as much as I appreciate that this is a really well-prepared document by, a consultant, we just want to make sure that our voices are heard and our desires are reflected in that official community plan and in this document as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Anyone else? Actually, you know what, I have to ask the committee if it's okay if we extend the, okay, go ahead. We usually only have 15 minutes for public input, but
Sorry about that.
that's okay, it's
I just
worthwhile.
want to add to what Rebecca said and make sure that we consider all the farming that happens here, not just ALR. So we do have a lot of farms on other rural residential, forestry and other types of land. So, and that hasn't been considered in this yet. And so we've asked Alison and her team to start looking at that to actually quantify how much farmland, people who have farm status in the rest of the valley, and make sure that those are considered in the policies. So it's not just ALR.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. All right, can we move on now? All right, grant and aids, I guess.
Yeah, so there's no delegations at this meeting, and the next item is correspondence, and there are a number of grant and aid requests for, I believe, and I'm not sure if it's the pleasure of the committee. They have typically been done as a block with.
No, we don't, we do them individually.
But we read them out individually,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So is that what you'd like to do? Read them all out and then move them as a block, or do them individually?
Just do them individually, that would be great, and we're going to
Okay.
add Director Acton's to this lot now, or does it go down to new business?
It goes to new
Okay.
business, yeah. So, okay, so the first item is C1, a grant and aid request, Electoral Area A. I'll go right to the recommendation. That it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area A, Mill Bay Malahat, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Mill Bay and District Conservation Society to support the operation of the Society's coho salmon conservation projects and enhancements.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carried.
C2, the recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area A, Mill Bay Malahat, in the amount of $500 be provided to the Cobble Hill Event Society to support Music in the Park 2023.
Moved, seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion's carried.
C3, that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Mill Bay and District Conservation Society to support the operation of the Society's coho salmon conservation projects and enhancements.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion's carried.
And C4, that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $2,000 be provided to the Cobble Hill Event Society to support Music in the Park 2023.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion's carried.
Madam Chair, quick comment, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank my colleague from Area A for her contributions to the salmon and to the Music in the Park. If any of you have not been, and this is for the public as well, if anybody of you haven't been to that salmon collection, go and try and lift them out, because even as small as they are, they're mighty powerful. We get the school children, we get the schools, we get everybody down there. It's something to see. And as far as the Cobble Hill Event Society is concerned, they are now becoming more and more self-sufficient. This will help them get the really top lines that they've been getting lately. And so watch this space, more to come. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, on to reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first report on the agenda is from the Strategic Initiatives Division regarding the agricultural policy and regulations best practices for the CVRD. And it's going to be, I believe Alison will introduce it, but we do have, well, I guess you'll introduce our speaker as well, right?
Yes,
okay,
I can.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Allison.
Am I on? This is good? Okay, great. Chase, would you mind loading up the first R1 presentation? I just have a few slides to introduce the report, and then I'll introduce Ione, who's joining us virtually, and then I have a couple more slides to close. She's got about a 20-minute presentation, if that's okay, to explain her report. So here we go.
I'm really excited about this one.
Me too. Okay, so Chase, it's the link that I sent you this morning. So this is Ione's presentation, and she can share it. So perhaps I will, the second from the top. There you go. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay. Thanks for your patience. We good? Okay, I think it's ready. All right, so I'll just move through this quickly. So as you know,
Oh, look, Director Morrison joined us. Hello.
So as you know, the Strategic Initiatives Division is responsible for the development of the modernized official community plan, and an official community plan must be consistent with the Agricultural Land Commission Act. So to meet this legislative requirement, as well as to look at best practices for both policy and regulations because of the significance of agricultural land to our region, we sought a review of agricultural policy and the existing zoning regulations. And so in just a minute, I will introduce Ione Smith of Upland Consulting. But first, I'd like to provide just a bit of context, as there's been quite a bit of interest in this report since the agenda was published. Okay, let's just see. I think some of these slides are. Okay, so I don't think the slides are exactly what had been prepared. So perhaps I'll just recall from memory that there's been a lot of different agricultural initiatives and plans that the CVRD has initiated over the past many years. So looking back to 2010, which was when the agricultural area plan was adopted, and 2011 there was an agricultural advisory establishment bylaw for an agricultural advisory committee to become established, and that was functioning for some time. There's been quite a bit of initiatives by the Environmental Services Department or Division, who looked at agricultural water demand models, as well as participating in different forums. So there's been quite a few different initiatives. Right now, the sort of current context is in the 2020 to 2022 strategic plan, there is an action item which is I believe, to develop with First Nations and municipalities a regional food security strategy, is I believe the accurate wording. And in the Economic Development Committee strategic plan, there's also a strategic plan or goal to further that. We also, as part of the development of the Modernized Official Community Plan, have had a lot of GIS analysis conducted of both agricultural land designations and also to contribute to the zoning bylaw. Looking into the future, we are proposing in the draft OCP to update the Regional Agricultural Area Plan, and we expect to bring forward a report that addresses that in the context of the work plan for 2024-2025. And as you have heard, there's significant interest in this. So with that, I'm going to end these slides. I've got one that I can return to afterwards with the recommendation, but I think at this point I will, Chase, if you could lower the screen, I will introduce Ione. So Ione Smith is a professional agrologist with a background in agricultural planning and land resource science. She founded Upland Consulting in 2021 and has extensive experience in developing policies and plans to improve farm viability and food production. During her career, she's developed agriculture and food security plans, climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies, and farm business plans. In addition to her consulting work, Ione currently serves as a commissioner on the ALC South Coast panel and is an instructor of community economic development approaches to food at Simon Fraser University. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ione.
Welcome, Ione.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So first of all, big thank you for inviting me to present on this report today. I'm really excited to hear about some of the momentum that it's caused and the interest within the community. So I'll go over it and then I will answer any questions that that you may have. Alison already did a great job of introducing me, so I definitely won't belabor that. But I did also want to mention that I'm currently working on an agricultural plan for the Comox Valley Regional District. I've completed a plan for the Regional District of Nanaimo, as well as Denman Island, Salt Spring Island, District of Saanich, and several other communities on the island. So although I don't live on the island, I'm fairly familiar with it from an agricultural context. And I live in Seashelt on the Sunshine Coast, so just across Georgia Strait from you. There were 4 key goals, and I do want to sort of spend a minute to talk about the scope of the project. I know there's some questions about whether or not the project considered only ALR land or agricultural land outside the ALR. The focus and scope was primarily on land within the ALR, and part of the reason for doing that is because there was a recognition that quite a lot of ALC rules and regulations have changed over the last few years. So there was interest in ensuring that some of the recommendations that are being brought are to bring the CVRD's tools and planning documents in line with some of those changes. So we were looking at reviewing the draft agricultural policies and regulations within the modernized OCP and zoning bylaw, which I believe is now the consolidated land use bylaw within that context. And also ensuring that best practices are considered. And so, because the scope didn't involve much engagement with the community, with the agricultural community, this is really meant as sort of a backgrounder, information around what other communities are doing for best practices and some things for the CVRD to consider as it moves forward with some of your planning initiatives. Allison also mentioned the agricultural plan potentially to be occurring in the future. And so a lot of what I'm going to be presenting on and what's in the report would do very well with being integrated into a discussion if and when an agricultural plan for the region was to be considered. So that's just a bit of context for you. What we did to come up with these recommendations is we did take a look at the current OCP and zoning bylaws. We also looked at the development permit area guidelines, local area plans, and cannabis bylaws. We were working alongside teams of other consultants who were working on the OCP update, for example. And so we did have access to some mapping analysis that was done by another consultant. We specifically looked at, as I mentioned, the Agricultural Land Commission policies and regulations. However, we also integrated input from Ministry of Agriculture and Food, bylaws, standards, and guidelines. They've published quite a bit up to this point around everything from sizing and siting of homes to cannabis to farm worker housing. We also looked at Ministry of Environment. They've published a code of practice for agricultural environmental management, which was enacted just a couple of years ago. So it's still fairly new. So there's opportunities usually within OCPs and zoning bylaws to also to consider that piece of legislation. We looked at published best practices as well as examples from other communities. So having worked around the province has afforded me the privilege of being able to see in action what tends to work and also what tends not to work, and also to try and make sure that when I'm speaking with communities, I'm bringing forward some of the most innovative policies as possible. So we cross-referenced these findings also with the GIS database that the other consulting team was working on, and that provided us some interesting sort of visuals as to how things would look on the ground, and also provide us with an opportunity to look at things outside of the ALR for accessory development opportunities, which I'll talk about in my presentation. So in terms of project deliverables, we did have several meetings and presentations with CVRD staff along the way. This was finalized sort of last June, I believe. So there's been a few months since that was finalized, but up until that point, we were in communication quite regularly with CVRD staff. The set of recommendations, there's 25 of them, there's 10 for within the OCP context, 3 for development permit area guidelines, another 10 for the land use bylaw, and 2 for the cannabis bylaw. And then we crafted the final report, which was in your packet. I do also want to give a bit of context about this concept of best practices. The most successful agricultural policies are nested within planning tools at the local government level. And so what I mean by that is that you don't just see them or hear them in a one-off document. They're repeated and they are connected. And so within that nesting process, a culture of agricultural sector support and agricultural land protection is embedded within the community. And so I've just listed here a few examples of how agricultural policies can be integrated and embedded within the planning culture of any local government. So for example, the regional growth strategy, official community plan, which provides those visioning kind of oversight and land use designations, and then zoning bylaws and land use bylaws, which are more of the nitty-gritty regulatory pieces. The agricultural plan is a great opportunity for the agricultural community to come together and identify challenges and opportunities to work on together as a group, and also with support from local government. And then, of course, other tools and opportunities like development permit area guidelines. So with that in mind, before I get into the recommendations, I do want to also underscore that not every recommendation is going to necessarily be appropriate for every parcel of land. So when we were doing this project, we were really looking broad scale and zooming out and looking at things from a regional perspective. And so there may be recommendations that you might spot and might feel that are not the most appropriate fit for a particular parcel or property that you're familiar with, and that's fine. The intent is really to start discussing some of these and figuring out how they may and may not apply to the region. Okay, so for the 10 modernized OCP recommendations, the first one is to recognize the jurisdiction of the Agricultural Land Commission up front. Many of the OCPs already did this and did a good job of it, but there was just some opportunities to be a bit more consistent and to ensure that the language spoke to the ability of the ALC to make final decisions about certain applications. The second one is to use the agricultural land designation for all ALR lands. We often find in working with communities that OCP land designations sometimes don't always align with agriculture, even for land in the ALR. It may designate land for recreation or parks or even light industrial. So there's an opportunity to provide some consistency in that regard as well. Thirdly, around the support for local agricultural plans. I know Allison spoke to the opportunity of a regional agricultural plan, but there's also an opportunity to look at local, more small scale, either at the electoral area or the village kind of community level around local agricultural planning to make sure that those priorities are embedded within the OCP as well. We also looked at consistency needs around the food plans themselves. So there's plans, adjacent to the CVRD, and then there's the older plan, and so there's a need to update them and make sure that they are as innovative as possible. And then those can be directly embedded within the OCP as well. Number 5 was something that came up again and again. In reviewing the OCP was that there's opportunities to speak to agriculture in so many different sections. There's so many different themes within community planning that now inherently require us to think about agricultural land, whether that's climate change, looking at ecosystem services, how are we managing our water? Like the Coxsila River watershed, for example, has a very important agricultural stakeholder component. Emergency planning as well, looking at livestock evacuation, how droughts and other emergencies may be impacting the community. There's opportunities to make those connections somewhat more explicitly within the document. We also looked at definitions. So definitions are a pet interest of mine. I'm always interested to see how different communities define certain terms like watercourse or agriculture, and they tend to be very different. And that's okay, but there should be consistency, at least within the community's documents, as to how these terms are being interpreted for the clarity and for the confidence of the end user, of the landowner, and of the decision makers as well. So there's opportunities to improve consistency in that regard. We also recommend providing some more clear differentiation between the terms urban agriculture and rural agriculture. So in that regard, rural agriculture tends to be characterized more by commercial operations, larger farms or hobby farms, whereas urban agriculture can be considered more intensive and obviously located within a more residential landscape, usually outside of the ALR. But they should receive unique and specific consideration, and I think that's normal. Agricultural policies for in the urban context should be more aligned with residential use policies. There's opportunities at almost every type of residential zoning to bring in agriculture, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the zoning bylaw as well. There's also a need to consider temporary farm worker housing in policies. We noticed this was a bit of a gap in the CVRD's documents, and that's likely because it just hasn't been a big issue up until this point. But there's a sense within the community and certainly from the province that farm worker housing is an issue that should be contemplated at the local government level more and more. Was just in the news actually today and yesterday around the need for bringing in additional workers to ensure the viability of farming in Canada. We also looked at how tourism was addressed in agricultural areas within the OCP, and again felt that there was some need for better consistency around things like bed and breakfasts. Also, the ability to have tourist accommodations either within the principal dwelling or not. And so in order to achieve that consistency, it wouldn't require a lot of work, but just a bit of discussion with the community as to what is the most appropriate level of tourism and tourism accommodation as well within the agricultural community. And lastly, but probably most importantly, is to keep reinforcing urban growth containment boundaries. The CVRD has done a good job of that, but we didn't want it to get lost in the shuffle of some of these more detailed recommendations. So continuing to uphold that boundary is going to be really critical. And I think, this week, which is the 50th anniversary of the Agricultural Land Reserve, there have been some great articles in the media, one of which was Joan Sawicki, who's one of the forefathers or foremothers of the ALR, who always said the best friend of the Agricultural Land Reserve is local governments with good urban planning policies. So I thought that was very apt. So that was the 10 recommendations for the OCPs. Moving into the development permit area recommendations, there were only 3. And again, we come down to looking at definitions. So there's some differing language around definitions within development permit area guidelines and also within how these terms are used by the province. So in particular, we were looking at the Code of Practice for Environmental Management because that regulation deals primarily with setbacks, for example. And we were also looking at the ALR use regulation. So there's opportunities to ensure that there's some alignment and consistency with those documents. Again, to provide clarity and consistency and confidence. With regards to DPA 1, which was around riparian area protection, we recommend considering protecting riparian areas from certain types of agricultural development and also removing the exemption provided for normal farm practices. So this in no way would restrict the ability for farmers to continue to farm alongside within properties that have riparian areas, but it would encourage and promote things like fencing or healthy riparian setbacks to ensure that access of livestock directly into waterways is minimized, for example. And this is consistent with the direction that many other local governments are moving in at the moment, particularly also aligning with the Code of Practice, which really is encouraging setbacks from certain types of agricultural activities. Again, not all agricultural activities, but certain types that would have the most impacts for protecting ecological services. And then the third one was for DPA number 8, which is around farmland protection. And there's an ability to really refocus that DPA on the responsibility of non-ALR properties to protect farmland, and also to start examining the role that roads can play within buffer areas to make sure that those buffer areas are doing the job that they've been charged to do, which is to make sure that the conflicts between urban and non-urban landowners is really quite minimized. Then moving into the consolidated land use or the zoning bylaw recommendations, I wanted to speak to subdivision first of all. So the first one is really to update the permitted residential uses on agricultural lands. That's really just in keeping with the changes to the ALC Act and regulations. And then there's one recommendation around reducing the overall number of agricultural zones and keeping the minimum parcel sizes as large as possible. So the rationale for keeping minimal parcel sizes large is that when we did this analysis with the GIS consultant, we looked at each electoral area. We looked at the total number of parcels in the agricultural land reserve. We looked at this minimum parcel size that was listed within the zoning bylaw or the land use bylaw, and then compared it to how many parcels exist that are larger than that and how many exist that are quite small. So for example, in electoral areas A and C, there were only 5 parcels in the ALR that are greater than 30 hectares in size, but 48% of the parcels are less than 2 hectares or about 5 acres, and 28% are less than 1 hectare. So what we're striving for here is really to ensure that there's a diversity of parcel sizes within the ALR, and this will in turn allow a greater diversity of agricultural practices to be brought into the community. So for example, a dairy farm would take an average of at least 40 acres of land just for a small head of dairy, so that there's enough forage to feed the animals and enough land for manure management, for example. A study that was done by the Ministry of Agriculture even back in 2007, so 15 years ago now, on Vancouver Island, looked at the impacts of subdivision approvals that were brought to the ALC. So every time the ALC approved a subdivision, they were tracking to see what would happen over time to those properties. And it was found that by and large, the properties where the subdivision application was rejected, that were made to be kept whole, there was a likelihood that that land over time would be farmed to a greater extent than the land that was subdivided. The more and more subdivisions that happen, the more and more likelihood there is for that land to turn into rural residential, and also just for more and more opportunities for an intrusion of more rural residential lifestyle into the agricultural land base. So I just wanted to explain a bit of the rationale there behind that recommendation. Number 16 was again around definitions. So we looked at the ALC, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and the Ministry of Environment. We were specifically there looking to make sure that the jurisdiction of the ALC was stated up front and highlighted throughout. And we also noted that there was a need to include new definitions for structures such as vertical farming, controlled environment structures, alcohol production facilities, things that maybe weren't contemplated 10, 15 years ago within the context of agriculture, and that there was a need for consistent definitions for environmental terms that are related to agriculture, again, such as water courses. So to provide some clarity there. The 17th was to look at updating the permitted residential uses, again, with the new ALC rules and regulations. So that could be everything from allowing a secondary dwelling up to a certain size, 90 square meters in most circumstances, and also looking at siting of homes. So again, this is something that may not be applicable to every single property in the CVRD, but by and large, looking from a regional planning perspective as to where these new houses, if a new house on farmland is being proposed, where is it going to be located? Will it do its best to minimize the overall footprint of the residential accessory uses like driveways and septic fields on the parcel? And generally, best practices is to keep those close to the road. We also looked at home occupation and home-based businesses. It's really important to allow some flexibility around this so that farmers have different streams of income, and so that also farm families may not have both spouses involved directly in agriculture, and some may want to have a home-based business. Of course, we want to support that. However, there's also sometimes the structures involved with the home-based businesses can become quite large. There can be vehicle parking needs, truck parking, and so on. In many communities, there's a requirement for farm tax status to be obtained by the property before certain home-based business activities or structures can be built as well, to ensure that the first and foremost activity on that property is farming. We looked at some issues like buildings, fencing, signage, so some of these more infrastructure-based pieces on farmland. And this is where we also looked at consistency across different types of agricultural land, whether it was in the ALR or not, because these are things that local governments have direct purview over. We did recommend, and I know this might be one that also folks might have some questions about, but looking at potentially providing some opportunities for fencing. So there's fencing restrictions. We looked at maybe providing higher fences to keep certain wildlife like deer out, and also looking at agritourism accommodation and farm gate sales as well, and ensuring that level of consistency again. Agritourism accommodation regulations. So as I just mentioned, those are also important, looking to make sure that there's those consistencies, not just with accommodations, but also the types of activities. And so everything that is aligned with those activities, like parking, for example, gathering events, making sure that those distinctions are properly made. In terms of environmental setbacks, we suggested the best practice of requiring that buildings are located outside of 30 meters of water courses and also from the sea, and that could be integrated into the development permit area for riparian protection as well. We also considered the setbacks associated with cannabis production. My understanding is that the cannabis bylaw has gone through an endorsement process recently, and so I won't belabor those, but we did speak to some of those as well. We also looked at restricting certain uses on farmland. So local governments do have the ability to not outright prevent or prohibit, but can restrict the size and scale of some types of agricultural activity on farmland, particularly controlled environment structures, which are essentially indoor farming. So that could be vertical farming, that could be indoor cannabis production, and so forth. So we did talk about that and about considering restrictions on the non-soil-based types of farming within the ALR, really to protect the soil capability for the prime soils as well. In terms of accessory agricultural uses, we talked a little bit about how we can best manage the role of other zones to accommodate some of those uses. So one concern that we had was that a lot of the industrial zones land parcels are already quite small, and small industrial parcels are difficult to accommodate agricultural processing or cannabis production, slaughter abattoirs, for example. They often need fairly large parcels, or at least larger than an acre or half an acre. And so there's an interest in maintaining some of those as larger sizes as well. The proliferation of park designation in the ALR is not uncommon. We see that in a lot of communities, but there is an opportunity there to consider how parkland might be able to support new entrants, opening up incubator farms, for example, just by and large providing more of an opportunity for agriculture to still occur within a park setting. The last two were, again, with the cannabis bylaw recommendations. So we had put forth the idea of considering micro and standard cannabis production levels, and I believe that was incorporated into the recent bylaw changes, and also ensuring that compliance and enforcement was highlighted and leveraged by partnering with the ALC, and I saw that was also included. So that is it. That's a lot of information. I know I'm here to answer any questions the best I can, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Ione. I thought it was a really well done report. Questions for Ione? Director Martman, the farmer.
So I'll lead off, and yes, I raise beef cattle. I have a farm about 35 acres up in Yellow Point. And so when I read this report, I immediately sent this out to a few farmers to get a little bit of a unofficial version back. And some comments came back as totally excellent in some areas, and other areas, what the heck? I think that's what they said. So I will maybe pose some of the what the heck ones as start, and maybe I'll go with one, and maybe others would want to join in. And I think one of the ones is around building permits. So that's R19 for agricultural structures. And certainly, maybe you can speak a little bit more about that, because building permits, in my mind, or a lot of people's minds, looks like red tape. And also requiring farmers to meet certain standards of building codes, and if you want to cut a tree down, mill it, build a barn, which farmers do, then you would be facing all kinds of concerns, perhaps, of using that material. So maybe I can just leave you to open-ended question about why that is a suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. A good question. So the objective there around the recommendation to consider permits for agricultural buildings is not to provide or not to create additional red tape for farmers. It's really to ensure that the CVRD knows what's happening on farmland, because as it stands right now, buildings that are for agricultural storage or any other agricultural purpose, the application does not need to go to the ALC, and oftentimes doesn't need a permit. So what that ends up meaning is that local governments and the province don't have a good handle on all the structures that are being built on farmland. The real objective here is to make sure, honestly, that non-conforming residential dwellings don't get built on farmland, because what the ALC has been seeing a lot of times is a barn with a second floor apartment being built on it, and that hasn't necessarily been approved. So if there's a way to consider how that might happen, whether it's through simply a conversation with the farmer as a first step to make sure that the building that's being built is, is of the intent, or if there is a permit application in place where the schematics for the building need to be submitted, that would be the way to do it. It wouldn't be necessarily applicable to the types of smaller scale structures that I think you're describing, for example. It would be for the larger buildings, and it's a direction that the city of Abbotsford and several other agricultural communities are going in, because there was a real concern about human health and safety. As you can probably guess, a lot of those buildings are not built to the same standards, and if they are housing people, then it can become of concern. So that's the under objective there.
Follow up?
Yes, please. Thank you for that. And I think sometimes we forget the devil's in the details. And, so I think when when I hear a building permit, I need those extra details to really understand it better. So appreciate that. When it comes to siting of agricultural structures, any consideration given to setbacks? Because I mentioned this from one farmer particularly that said, you have to go 15 meters from a property line. I have to give up 15 meters of agricultural land, perhaps, to site that in a certain place. Whereas if I moved it up closer to the property line, I could have a much, use more of my land. So has any consideration been given to setbacks, or where did those like? I didn't see it in the report.
Yeah, we didn't necessarily consider setbacks for agricultural structures. We were really looking at setbacks for residential buildings and accessory residential components. However, my personal opinion is with setbacks for agricultural buildings is that it's hard to put a blanket policy out there, because, like you said, each property will be so different and each type of farming activity will be so different. You may need a feed silo to be in a particular place. You may need, a compost facility, small scale compost facility for your manure to be in a specific location. So I think the setbacks, often what they do, though, is help to minimize disturbances between farming and non-farming properties. And so it would be probably an area to look at specifically around the ALR, non-ALR boundary. I think that would be a good topic to also discuss at the regional agricultural planning stage as well.
Director Wilson. I know you do.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And Director Martman and I have been corresponding on this particular one, mainly from the point of view that I need his advice on a lot of things. There's a bit of a conundrum here, because we went to a housing conference not so long ago, and there is obviously a housing problem, not just socially, but within the farming community as well. And I think you've addressed that there also. You cannot run a farm without the farmers. And one of the big things is the succession planning that needs to go into effect, so that the parents, the older generation who have been running these farms for 20, 30 years need to stay there, want to stay there, move aside, let their children, their other extended families take over. But in some cases, in order to do that, they have to build an accessory building. And I spoke with our planning department, Ms. Yeroff, and she said there are considerations for that to happen without too much of a carry on to do that. But in this particular case, we need to make it easier for those parents to move to a smaller building on one side, so that their children, their grandchildren can take over and get that succession going. So is there anything in here that allows for that, or is that already in place there? Is there anything that can be done to alleviate that problem?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that was one of the objectives that the Ministry of Agriculture and Food had when it updated the ALR rules and regulations just 2 years ago to allow a 90 meter squared secondary dwelling on all farmland. So before that, there had to be an application that would provide rationale to the ALC as to why the additional dwelling was going to be required. And now the province has come forward and said that all properties in the ALR can have a secondary dwelling if they don't have one already. So I think the policy objective there was to kind of release that pressure, that like a release valve a little bit on that pressure, like you mentioned. Other opportunities, of course, are secondary suites. So making sure that secondary suites are allowed, that's something within the purview of local government. And then there is a home site severance policy at the ALC level, so that if you owned your farm and you were farming continuously since before the ALR came into place, you do have the legal right to have a small subdivision of that home off of the property in recognition of the need for farmers to sometimes retire on the property itself. So it's hard because succession planning often comes to the province, often comes to the ALC with subdivision applications, for example, or requests for additional housing. And the challenge is ensuring that the second generation, the new generation, still intend to farm. And so there are challenges in essentially ensuring that the level of residential use on the property matches the level of intensity of farming, if you will.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. I've got some other questions, but I'll yield to others who have questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Does it, Director Siegel?
I don't really have any questions for Ione. This is maybe more just for Ally to advocate for some of the things that were brought up in the public input, which is just to really connect with our agricultural community, not only members within the ALC, but also outside of that. And just to put the idea out there, I know other regional districts have an agricultural committee, and it sounds like there's a group, that wants to get together to give some feedback on the MOCP. But since it is part of food security is part of 2 strategic initiatives in different areas, I don't know if it makes sense for our community to also have an agricultural committee, so that there's that kind of base of connection and knowledge for these issues. And I just want to say I really loved, I think, the 10th recommendation, which is for us as a board to really hold the line with the urban containment boundaries and recognize that the rural residential sprawl is what takes out a lot of agricultural land, whether it's ALC or not, to just big homes and land that doesn't get farmed. So thank you so much for this report. I really like it.
Do you want to respond?
Sure. I mean, there was a lot to that, but I think that certainly part of our recommendation, the staff report, there's 2 parts. One is about incorporating the recommendations or considering the recommendations in the OCP and the zoning bylaw. The second is about posting this report on Plan Your Cowichan with a window of opportunity. We have 30 days, but certainly considering the interest, we can extend that if that's the direction of the committee. That's what we're proposing within the capacity and resources that we currently have in terms of an agriculture advisory committee and an agricultural plan that is subject to the direction of the board.
Thank you. Director Martman, back to you, unless someone who hasn't asked a question. Director Acton.
Thank you. I just wanted to go in front of Director Martman. No. I guess what I hear what Director Segal said, and I'm trying to kind of formulate in my mind, there's all this ALC land that we're mostly just talking about ALC, but like was pointed out, what about our agricultural land, A1, A2, maybe we have A3, I don't know. But how much, like what is the comparison here? Like, do we have, if we put, I guess I have a few questions. I just kind of want to understand how much of our land is actually agricultural, and including the non-ALC land, and do we have enough? Do we need more? Or, do we have too much? Like, I guess then we would be better equipped to make those decisions when they come forward. But maybe that's in the future, coming in the future. I know that's not totally related today.
Yeah, I don't have those specific numbers at my fingertips for you. I could probably find them quite easily. The ALC does keep good records of the amount of ALR land within each community, but I think your question was more expansive than that, and considering what type of agricultural land is actually outside the ALR. The best way to look at some of that is through the farm tax status. Parcels with farm tax status don't need to be in the ALR. And so oftentimes it's a good indication of how many properties are farming outside of the ALR boundary as well. The main difference there is, of course, land outside the ALR still has to accommodate the zoning bylaws of the local government, but it doesn't have to abide by the ALC rules and regulations, of course. So what we do recommend is consistency and having that agricultural land designation at the OCP level, and then having as few zones related to agriculture as possible. Like in Kelowna, for example, they have an A1 and an A2 zone. A1 is in the ALR. A2 is agricultural land outside the ALR, and they actually have very similar rules and regulations for both. So they're trying to create consistency so that you don't get these kind of like Swiss cheese effects of some parcels that are quite good, agricultural soil, and you're going to have all sorts of uses that are not conducive to agriculture on them. So they look at it more from that broader perspective. Doesn't totally answer your question, but the numbers, I don't have those parcel numbers off my report.
Allie, do we have those numbers?
Well, not the parcel numbers necessarily, but I've been told by a reliable source that about 4% of the plan area is in the ALR or agriculturally designated. So whether or not that's enough, I think that's really a larger question, and whether or not the land is being farmed, because just because it is ag designated or in the ALR does not mean much. And perhaps that's something that an agricultural plan can look at, is encouraging that use, increasing that use.
And
Yeah, and just, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and then the other added thing is it's whether it's being farmed or not, but you also need water to farm usually, and that's becoming a constraining factor.
I was just going to add that there's also some farmland in the ALR that's crown land. Particularly, we see that on mountain slopes, and sometimes that's being leased out for forestry operations or uses that are not necessarily agricultural. So it'd be interesting to look at those numbers as well.
Director Martman.
Thank you. And not so much crown land in our area, but we have a lot of forestry. So I'm curious if we move forestry out of those numbers, if that 4% would change drastically. If we're 4% of our regional district is agricultural, what proportion if we take the forestry out of it?
I'm not sure that I understand the question exactly, but do you mean if you subtract land that's forested in the agricultural land reserve?
No, we have private managed forests. If you take those lands out of the equation, your agricultural land proportion is going to increase substantially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I will also add that in each of the existing local area plans that are Schedule B in the HOCP, there are a breakdown of the amount of lands designated under each designation. Thank you.
Okay. I think everybody is aware of the Agricultural Land Commission and the regulation in the Act is there for the preservation of farmland. And I think sometimes I get feedback I get feedback about, yes, the farmland will be there, but that's a land use. Where's the farmer? And that's the piece that I hear a lot about. We're losing farmers, we're aging out. And so it's about how do you balance between all the regulations that are in place and the ability of a farmer to make a living and sustain and maintain that farm. And I think that's a balance that how much does local government need to be involved? And I think that's a really good question to put out to the agricultural community. And the community at large, I think, because food security is certainly paramount to everyone. That's sort of a statement. I have another question that comes up, and that's under R17, and that's building siting. Because I know every realtor will tell you location, location, location is the most important thing. And I think farmers may have that same input because, every farm, when you visit one farm, you visited one farm. And every farm is going to have different soils, different issues, and different concerns about how they can locate the buildings, not only the dwellings, the buildings, the structures on those properties to best suit farming practice. And so I know I looked at the guidelines that were out there, and I'm wondering on your thoughts, because the guidelines talk about if you can't build within that 60-meter max setback along the property lines, that you could look at development variance permits, board of variances, or even in some cases, if it's more than 60 hectares, they're just exempted from those setbacks. So I'm curious about how you would advise local government on how to incorporate those types of, I guess, flexibilities into setbacks for dwellings on farmland. Thank you.
That's a good question, and I think you raised specifically a good point or criteria, which is around active farms. So what we see often is that folks are leaving cities and they're buying small lots in the agricultural land area, and they're putting up their houses based on the best view or back at the property because it's more private, but they're not necessarily doing it for the best interests of farming. Absolutely, real farmers are, but I'm not so sure that some others who are purchasing farmland for other sort of primary reasons are doing that. So I think there's ways of going about reaching sort of the nexus of this recommendation, which is around protecting a viable contiguous land base for future farming opportunities without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So maybe it doesn't have to be such a formal process that if you can't meet that setback, that maximum setback because of legitimate agricultural reasons, like you want to have your house on a rocky outcrop at the back, maybe it doesn't need to go through such a formal, expensive, long process. Maybe it's more of a conversation with the local planner as you're, putting forward your application to start with, and just making sure that those considerations have been listed, because I can tell you that at the ALC level, those are things that the ALC is considering anyway. So if, for example, there was an application that did not, that required approval from the ALC that was residential, the ALC would be looking specifically to ensure that it was meeting those guidelines for setback maximums, particularly if there didn't appear to be a biophysical reason why it couldn't be, or a legitimate farm reason why it couldn't be. So in some ways, this is about saving time in the longer run too for some of those types of applications.
I'm going to go to Director Morrison right now because he's had his hand up apparently for a while.
Thank you. Thank you, Ione. I'm going to pose maybe a difficult question here because the ALC and the reserve has had some changes to it in previous years, and I'm not specifically talking about lands that were designated for the reserve way back when that might have been seen as bottom lands in valleys in principally forested areas. I'm going to talk about the lands that have been negotiated swaps for taking lands out and inclusions in 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 basis. I kind of call those the phony baloney ALC lands. They have only ever grown trees on them. They will never be viable farms, but they're part of that no net loss calculation for ensuring that we keep the land base. Director Martman already mentioned that the private managed forest lands that are only ever going to be involved in growing trees. But I'm talking about lands that maybe 30 years ago looked like they made sense for being a potentially agricultural use around communities, but now they're essentially preventing communities from any sort of expansion. And I've got one in my particular community that's bounded either by a mountain or by agricultural land reserve lands, and that they won't be developed. There's no potential. They'll never grow anything but trees on them. And is there any movement in the commission to look at those artificially created agricultural land reserve acres that were perhaps traded and swapped, and given the cost of lands and potential development and the needs for communities to grow, I don't think it's going to affect the number of functional viable farms. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, fair enough. Well, so one thing I'll say is that the no net loss policy isn't something that the commission considers anymore, or if it ever did, I'm not sure. I know it was certainly considered at the local government level, and Surrey still has it within its agricultural policy. But at the provincial level, it's not considered a legitimate argument. However, yes, there's likely some longer term impacts from previous decisions that may have been made, but it's not on my radar as an issue that seems to be coming up much at the commissioner level. And I know that the rules have changed so that if there was interest in excluding lands from the ALR, it needs to be done now from the local government as part of a kind of larger planning exercise rather than individual landowners. So it probably would require a bigger discussion with the ALC staff and so forth.
Follow up.
So with maybe through to Ally, in our discussions on the MOCP and local area plans, any discussions with staff or consulting folks were, oh, that's ALR. Enough said. That was it. So I think I just heard from you that maybe some larger discussions on key sites might be something that could happen, and maybe through our local area plans, which I thought were kind of almost wrapped up. But Ellie, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I recall those conversations about holding the line on the LR for sure. And I think there might be different approaches from different people in terms of how strict the ALC would be in terms of adjusting boundaries. So, this is perhaps information that we should consider through the local area plan process, as you said, to sort of identify, I know in particular in Area F, that area that is, yes. So perhaps it's something we can take into consideration.
Thank you.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Director Martin has already covered a lot of the what the heck comments, so I'll leave those alone for the time being. First question, Ali, I'm sure you know the answer to this one. There was a question on how much ALR there is within our boundaries. Does the GIS have those layers in our database there?
Yes, we have that layer.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. One of the comments that Iona brought up just now, or the phrase that she brought up, was real farmers. Which kind of struck a bit of a chord with me, because in R14 it does say that it is worth noting there are a number of properties with farm tax status that are outside of the ALR within the CVRD. Now I'm probably going to start a bit of a fight here with some people, but these ones with farm tax status, are they actually productive? Are they actually doing, how do we police something like that where it's just a tax dodge? They're doing the absolute minimum there and paying next to no taxes on this. So I'm kind of concerned about those particular places. Is there any looking at those?
There's definitely an advocacy role that local governments can play in that regard. And this is something that's come up again and again in the different agricultural plans that I've worked on across the province, even in the Caribou Regional District, where you wouldn't necessarily think that this would be an issue. Farmers have concern that people are farming, as you kind of said, to the bare minimum to get the tax status, pay lower taxes. Because it's conferred by BC Assessment, which is not even Ministry of Agriculture and Food, it's a totally different ministry. It's something that local governments can do through an advocacy perspective, usually through the Union of BC Municipalities, the UBCM conference, for example. And I know it's come up at that conference a few times. So it'd be something worth pushing, because it seems to be a problem that's growing from just the Metro Vancouver kind of, high urban density areas into these more rural areas as well. And so when I say things like real farmers, what I'm saying there is more like looking at the level of residential use and ensuring that it matches the level of farming going on. So sometimes it might make sense to have 3 houses on a piece of farmland to accommodate, up to 8 or 10 people, because there's just so much farming happening on that property. But ALC gets concerned about approving things like that because it's once a house is there, even if the type of farming or the level of farming changes, the house is not going to go away unless there's some strict covenants in place and so forth. So.
Yeah, if I and follow up, please. Yeah, and that's good comment. I'm glad to see that there are some moves to look at this more carefully. Now, one of the this is more a comment than anything else. You mentioned setbacks and the criteria. There, I'm glad to see that there seems to be a certain amount of flexibility here, and hopefully the will to assist the farmers, the proper farmers. That have been there for generations, as much as possible with that kind of flexibility. So thanks for putting that in there as well. Thank you.
Back to you, Director Martman.
Thank you. And no more specific items, but I am interested, and I guess I want to thank the CVRD for this particular consultant because of the breadth and depth of knowledge is really great. And so I guess I want to tap into that breadth and depth of knowledge and ask you, with your knowledge of governance, how do you see, what would you recommend to the CVRD around moving towards an agricultural plan? Is that advisable? An agricultural advisory committee? Is that something that you see as best practice? Maybe you can comment?
Yes, definitely. And I didn't really speak to that in the report because we weren't really talking about governance in the report, but certainly I would say the CVRD stands out as an outlier in terms of a regional district that doesn't have an agricultural advisory committee in so far as you do have a lot of agricultural activity. So you're not alone, but there's not many of you out there in terms of regional districts without one. So I think it would really depend on the terms of reference of the committee. The agricultural advisory committees can have either very little power and they can just be simply receiving information and commenting, or they can have a bit more power where they actually have a say in whether or not ALC applications, are forwarded on, for example. So it would really depend on the level of comfort with the power that is bestowed upon the committee through the terms of reference, and that probably would also be related to who sits on the committee. So the regional district of Nanaimo didn't have an agricultural advisory committee 10 years ago when we started their plan. And so we sort of recommended a soft and slow approach where we bring together a committee who's interested in developing the plan first and foremost, and then see how that might evolve into a more permanent type of committee who can speak more broadly to agricultural issues, but also how they can start being at the forefront of ensuring that the plan becomes implemented and monitoring and evaluating how the recommendations within the plan become implemented over time. So there's some really interesting and innovative roles that a committee can have. That being said, I know that in several regions, they've also done away with their agricultural committees, sometimes because they just feel like the work there is done for the time being, or because whoever gets elected decides there shouldn't be committees at all, like in my area on the Sunshine Coast. So it really depends, but it is something that I would recommend because I think it provides another layer of democracy in terms of agricultural planning for sure.
Thank you for that, and I'm hoping that we'll get some direction about how we can support this going forward from the committee and then from the board. I think the last piece for me really is that I really want to say that when I speak to other directors from other areas, that they see agriculture as being really supported in the CVRD and in ways that aren't in other regional districts. So we may be having gaps perhaps in the governance area or having plans to be built, but I don't think it's because the CVRD they're out there. We have food hubs, we have farmers, we have great production here. I think that is something that I just want to voice, but I think the idea is, from my perspective, if farmers need to have a voice, and this is one way for farmers to have a voice. Thank you.
Any more questions? So we have a recommendation. Yes, Director Acton.
I'd like to move the recommendation, but I don't think the 30 days is enough. Like this, we could keep going all day. So, and I hear more often than not, no matter how much work we put into marketing and trying to get the word out, I didn't know, I didn't hear about it. So I think like 90 days would be worthwhile. Then we have time on social media and to really get it spread around. I don't know. That's my suggestion.
So we also know that we heard from two wonderful farmers in my area that they are prepared to help bring people together for a meeting, which would be, which I think would be really awesome. I think we don't do enough, and I've only heard from the people in Area E, but agriculture is really important in Director Martman's area. I know Cobble Hill, you know, so I think if we could try and do that, and there's also different farming interests, so we have to pay attention to, there's large industrial farming, and then there's the small organic types of farming, and everyone has different ideas, but it is really important that we hear from everyone. So I'm not sure, there is no money in the budget for us to facilitate this, so we could, I'm certainly prepared to work with them, if anyone else is, to do this with our communities, to have a get-together to do that. The 30-day window is perhaps too small for just looking at the paper, but that's also relying on people individually to provide their comments. So other ideas?
I'm wondering if we could use a bit of a referral process as well to be a bit more proactive, where you send this out to APCs and maybe any farmer groups that are out there, farmers institutes, and to let them know to go to this Plan Your Couch, and that would be rather inexpensive, I would think, but it would get their feedback.
Okay, Director Wilson?
Yeah, and if Director, I'm sorry, if Director Acton wants to put forward a suggestion or a motion to change that 30-day period to perhaps 60 or 90 days, I could be quite happy to second that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that Director Acton will move the recommendation with a 90-day period, and staff will do their best to send it out widely, and I will work with my two great farmers to see if we can facilitate an actual meeting with people in person to have a conversation at some point. And I'm sure you will support us, will you, Ellie?
Yes, absolutely. It's great, 90 days, no problem with that. I just want to make sure that we'll be looking at sort of grassroots dissemination of spreading the word on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you help.
Yes.
You would be able to come to a meeting, for example, to answer questions, or?
I would love to come to a meeting.
Perfect. So it's been moved and second?
Can we have the recommendation put up on the board? Thanks.
Yes. Chase, would you mind putting up that final slide? So the recommendation had 2 points. I did want to suggest the possibility of, so I have to advance these slides, softening the recommendation from incorporating the Ioni's recommendations to considering them. That is a possibility. Just bear with us, please. There we go. So that's a possibility. And then certainly for the point 2, to increase that to a 90-day.
Okay, everyone okay? So it's been moved and seconded. Who seconded it? Mike did, right. Okay, so all in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion's carried. Director Martman.
And I'd like to make a motion to refer to staff this idea of a regional agricultural plan and the development of an agricultural advisory committee, and have them provide a report back to committee.
Do I have a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's take a break. Thanks, Ione. It was
Thanks,
great.
everybody.
Me too.
Welcome back, everyone. And we're moving on to R2.
So R2 is a report from the Development Services Division regarding application number RZ22B01 3949 Hillbank Road, PID 009470361.
Welcome, Mr. Buchan.
Thank you. Next slide, please. This is an application for a combined rezoning and a fish community plan amendment, and it's been submitted for the property at 3949 Hillbank Road. Next slide, please. The purpose of this application is to request that the property be redesignated to residential in the official community plan and rezoned to rural residential R1. Next slide, please. If approved, this would facilitate the creation of a 9-lot residential Bearland strata subdivision. And next slide, please. The staff recommendation is that the application be referred to external agencies for comment and feedback. Other options, such as requesting more information or denying the application, are detailed in the staff report. As part of the preliminary review by staff, Strategic Initiatives identified some concerns with the proposal, namely the increase in density in the Coquesala watershed and inconsistencies with the Fish Community Plan. Staff do note that the Coquesala watershed is currently the subject of a planning initiative between the province and Cowichan tribes. We received some initial feedback from the public regarding the mine permit that is referred to in the staff report, as well as the letter of rationale, noting that these activities are actually in the process of winding down. The property owners clarified that while their mine permit has expired, they understand that they can apply for a new permit and have conducted some initial feasibility studies. The agent is here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to come up and introduce yourself? And
I would. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My name is Rachel Sansom. I'm the agent for the applicant, Mr. Andrew Ketch, at the address on Hillbank. And I'll be happy to take your questions. And I have a couple of comments if we don't cover them off in the questions.
right, questions for the applicant? Why don't you go ahead and make your comments?
Oh, okay. Well, firstly, I'd like to comment about our neighbors. I did get a chance to chat with Frank briefly. Certainly, one of the exercises we will do, should we get approval to proceed to the APC, is work with our neighbors to identify all of their concerns and address those categorically before it would come back to the board. That's pretty much what we do with all of our applications, is make sure that the public consultation is done thoroughly. We understand that the concerns of the neighborhood, the watershed, the traffic, just the change in the land use certainly brings up a lot of concerns. We believe that this will be actually a more environmentally sustainable use of the land because the strata will be sort of in charge of it, and there'll be more eyes on the ground. And certainly we can apply a lot of environmental covenants, ensuring non-disturbance of the land. We believe that the quarry pond would be actually a really great benefit to the neighborhood, as it could be used as a fire pond with a right-of-way for your fire services to use. It's quite a big pond and quite deep, so it would have a large volume. It could also be used for irrigation landscaping, reducing the need for well water. And certainly we'll be keen to work with the Coquesala group to understand more about the aquifer. Quite often when you're doing well testing in areas of sensitivities, you have to do drawdown tests. You have to ensure that there's no impact to adjacent wells. So all of those studies would certainly be done as part of this process before it could be considered. We certainly understand that, as would paving the road. Gibson Road is currently an undedicated road over Crown land. That would be the primary access to the site, and it would be paved to Ministry of Highway standards. And all of the stormwater would certainly be managed in accordance with CVRD guidelines for no net increase of runoff or nuisance to adjacent properties. These are fairly large properties, and the footprint of the homes would be quite small. So the forest itself, being left intact, will manage the stormwater quite well on its own. There's also a very nice riparian area around on the property that would be further enhanced and protected. So it's just to us, we thought that the residential use, an increase of 7 units, would actually enhance the property and allow it to actually grow as an older forest, as opposed to another mines permit, which he's certainly able to apply for. I can't speak to whether he would get another permit or not, because that's provincially regulated. So I think those are all the points I wanted to cover. And if there's any questions, happy to answer those.
Any questions? Director Acton.
Yeah, thank you. Is there a remediation plan that the owner has to follow? Since he's, this mining plan has expired or it's
Yes.
come to its end?
My understanding, and I'm certainly not a mines expert, so my apologies for that, is that there is a remediation plan that has to be done, and that, again, is provincially monitored and regulated. So once a mine is winded down, they have to replant and repair the area that they've been mining.
So is this pond a result of the mining? And then, so wouldn't that does that have to be, like, I don't know, in my experience, some ponds are not all created equal.
Fair.
Sometimes the community has an issue with it if it's right to the groundwater or like, so, I guess, I'm just curious about, like, I guess, looking at the whole property, what's gonna be made better?
Yeah, I would expect that the pond would be allowed to stay. They currently pump the water out of it to be able to access it for gravel extraction and rock extraction for crushing. So I believe if that was not happening, it would fill with water, and then it would actually be treated as a water resource and habitat. And the areas around the pond, they're not planning on using the pond for public access or for swimming or for recreation. It would be maintained as habitat with riparian plantings and such around it. I believe that would be the plan, because you certainly don't want to fill it back in, particularly if it could provide a water resource. But we would provide those studies to ensure that it could do that and the water wouldn't just leak out and you'd have a big hole. So.
Other questions for staff or the applicant? Just hang on a sec. Director McClinton.
Thank you, through the chair. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Just curious, I don't know the area very well at all. I looked at the maps and I guess I probably should have Google mapped it. But just curious about the view. Is there a view on one side, and like, would there possibly be like a reason for people to cut down the trees for the view? You see that often. Then maybe a follow-up question after that's answered.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, the existing home has a spectacular view across the valley to Mount Provost. But again, environmental covenants could control tree cutting, and its home footprints would be established throughout the design approval process. So I don't believe there's a lot of other view opportunities other than the primary residence. Most of them would be actually in the forest.
Follow up, if I may.
Yep.
I guess I'll be really curious to hear a bit more from the director of the area, but I'm just wondering if, like, we're trying to serve two masters with a project, like if you had it your way, like, it just seems like 1 hectare, just such a large piece of land for one house. I mean, yeah, you know what? I'm going to withdraw my question. That's okay. I'm good. Thank you.
Other questions? Director Abbott.
Through the chair, we've got a similar quarry in Cobble Hill that is now, access is denied due to liability issues. Did I hear correctly? Is this water feature going to be accessible to the proposed residents, or just a standpipe for firefighting?
Thank you again for the chair. My understanding is that they do not wish for it to be a recreational quarry, that it would be maintained as a water reservoir and also habitat.
And a follow-up, if I may. The Mines Act doesn't require a reclamation where it be backfilled and put back to its original grade?
Again, through the chair, I am not 100% certain of that. I don't believe so, but I can certainly get that answer. If we proceed through the APC, I would bring that forward.
It sounds like a nice amenity for the current property owner and a bit of a potential liability for the 8 others that are going to live in the area. That's just a comment.
If I may, through the chair, it would be a Bearland strata, and the area that the quarry would sit on would be common property for all of the strata owners, so they would share the liability. In addition, we would provide a right-of-way in favor of the CVRD for firefighting so that they could access that to a standpipe. So I believe that their insurance would consider all that, and each individual would be responsible.
So to clarify, the other newcomers would only share in liability, but they wouldn't share in the enjoyment? Could they swim in it? Could they play in it? Could they put boats in it? Or is that just limited to the current owner?
As, again, through the chair, as common property, I believe the same rules would apply to all of the landowners. So I'm sure if one person were able to swim in it, everybody could. But again, their insurance would cover that off as a liability as well.
I guess I didn't ask clearly the first time, and that's what I wanted to know. Is it an amenity for all of those, that new subdivision? And it sounds like yes.
I believe it is, yeah, it's common property, that everybody would have ownership of that particular area. And through the environmental assessments we would do, it would make recommendations as to what an appropriate use of that would be.
Any other questions? I'll turn to the director of the area.
Okay. Well, I see every application as an opportunity, and I looked on Google Maps and I looked around, and there's no sewer nearby. There's no community water. It really is an application, as far as I can tell. Like, most of the neighborhood is here, and I opposed to it as an application that's not offering a lot to the community. So I do know in Area B, there's provisions in our OCP that have, I think it's 30% land gift if it's outside of the containment boundary. So it's interesting that this application doesn't really have anything to make better for the area. It's not offering a miraculous well to give people more water. It's not offering a trail to cut through to another area, and I don't see this kind of neighborhood developing in that area. So as this application stands, I would recommend denial, and based on what the last report by a staff member's summary, and just perhaps let your client know that they have until next week to produce something. They can go back and still work with staff and produce something that will be more in line with the vision of the community.
May I ask a question through the chair?
No,
Okay,
we've finished
sorry.
the question
All right.
period, so you can sit down, actually, if you like.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion, Sierra's made a motion, Director Acton's made a motion. Do I have a seconder? I have a seconder. Discussion now. Anyone like to discuss this? Director Deck.
It's not consistent with the official community plan, and community plans are so important, especially where it comes to growth development outside the growth containment boundaries. And as we all know, the Coxsala River or Coxsala watershed is just in danger. So any extra use in terms of development would, I think it would just increase the impact. So I'm also in favor of Director Acton's proposal. What do you call it? Motion. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yeah, I would add, I live in the Coxsala watershed, and I don't believe this is just a neighborhood issue. I believe it's a watershed issue. And there's a lot of people in the watershed who are very concerned and are really turning to this water sustainability planning process to help put us on a better path, because largely we've got ourselves into this pickle because of land use. And so continuing on the same type of development while we do the plan seems counterproductive from my perspective and from many people that I work with on the Coxsala issues. So I will be supporting the motion. Anyway, other comments?
I just have a question.
Corporate secretary, or corporate, yeah.
Because I'm filling in. I just have a question. So Director Acton is, in my understanding, she is moving option 3 in the report, is that right? Which is that it be recommended to the board that application be denied? Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
And that the reasons, it says citing reasons for the denial. So I'm assuming the discussion will capture that if the motion goes forward? Is that the idea? Okay.
Well, yeah, the issues are largely to do with water and being outside of the existing policy for the official community plan. Those are the two main things, and I think Director, Mr. Buchan noted those.
Okay, great.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Hold on, Ian's waving his hand.
Oh, there's Director Morrison. This
Okay,
will make you want
thank
to
you.
come to meetings in person, won't it?
So I'm along the lines of what Ms. Mohan had brought up. I heard sort of a combination between 2 and 3, and I'd love to have it clarified because it sounded like there might have been some discussion about the improvement of the proposal from the applicant and a week to, get it together before the board. And then there's some discussion about denying the application because there's some OCP and environmental concerns that might be the basis for 3. So let's get, is it we're denying it because of X and Y, or we want them to go back to staff and try to incorporate some of what the discussion has been today? Because those are 2 distinctly different resolutions. They're 2 and 3.
Can I clarify?
Yes, you are correct,
Okay.
Director Morrison. Director Acton will clarify.
So moving option 3, I don't actually see any ways to work with staff to make this a better application. I looked, I haven't seen the site personally, but just by looking to its proximity, the property itself, if we were to donate half of it as park or whatever, some amount, and does that create a buffer to the Coxsila? Is there a way to make this a win for the community? I don't see one, based on our community plan and the knowledge that I have presented in this report.
So is that clear? The motion on the table is to deny this application. Any more discussion? Director McClinton. You're muted, I believe.
There we go. Apologies for that. Yeah, thanks for that clarification. That helps. And, I think I'll be supporting the director on this motion. It seems like it's in a pretty sensitive area. Could staff or somebody just clarify for me, like, what this sits in the watershed and like how, maybe I'm just looking at the map here, like what proximity is it to the Coquihalla River? Can a staff clarify that?
Mr. Buchan, would you like to take that?
Thank you. I don't have the exact numbers on proximity, but if you look at the first page in the report, it does show the Coquihalla River in relation to the subject property on a map. That might help to provide some context there.
It's the backside of Cobble Hill, basically, and it's right adjacent to the Coxsila River. And that's one of the issues with the Coxsila River. The wells, the groundwater is intimately connected with the surface water, so, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? No one's opposed. Motion carried. R3.
R3 is a report from the Strategic Initiatives Division regarding ideas fairs and local area plan launch summary. And this report is for information.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. All right, we're just pulling up the PowerPoint. Excellent, thanks, Chase. All right, R3, Ideas Fair and Local Area Plan Launch Summary Report from the Planning and Strategic Initiatives Division. an engagement and consultation plan for the modernized OCP was prepared, and there were a few revisions because of the changing public health restrictions associated with COVID. The final plan was approved in April 2022. The plan outlined the goals, the principles, the legal requirements for consultation during the development of an OCP, as well as the proposed activities. This plan, this E&C plan, also included First Nations engagement, although I won't be discussing that today. That'll be the subject of a separate forthcoming report. But this staff presentation provides an overview of the community events since 2019 with a focus on the more recent ideas fairs. So in the engagement and consultation plan, this spectrum of public engagement from the International Association of Public Participation is referred to. The spectrum describes the increasing involvement of the public. So starting with inform, which in that case, the promise to the public is we will keep you informed, and then sort of increasing along to consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And the ENC plan had the stated intention of hitting the first three. But what we have sort of found in sort of review is that actually I think we're nearing the collaborate step on the spectrum, which we're quite happy with. So first, an overview of the OCP engagement events from 2019. There was, of course, overlap with the harmonization of the OCP, because always we've been talking about modernization since we started talking about harmonization. So in 2019, there were many Advisory Planning Commission meetings. In February 2020, we had the 4 open houses. In 2021, a significant event was the Plan Your Couch and engagement platform launch, which really changed the way we could engage with the public. In the spring of 2022, we had the virtual community circles. So of course, this is a time of virtual engagement, but we had a pretty good engagement on that and a lot of opportunity. In November 2022, at the Cobble Hill Ideas Fair, we had the volunteer thank you dinner for Advisory Planning Commission chairs and volunteer community circles, and I think that was well received and just a great event. And then we've had 7 ideas fairs. We had the ABC event in November in 2022, and then the remaining 6 in February 2023. So the ideas fairs and local area plan launches, as I said, we had 7 different events. We had over 800 participants, which we're quite pleased with. The events were organized around 6 stations, so there was content on the 8 policy goals, growth containment boundaries, land use designations. One of the stations focused specifically on local area plans, so collecting preliminary feedback on the local area plan priorities and special places and confirming the boundaries for those plan areas. We tried to, what we could, to be an inclusive environment. We had a kids table, coffee and tea and snacks. We had a welcome and thank you signs in Hulkaminum. And the events were well staffed, so when people arrived, it was open house style, so people could take their time to wander around, look at the posters, provide their comment, ask questions in kind of a one-on-one setting. And then there was the presentation and Q&A, and that was actually quite a large draw. Many people arrived for that opportunity. The Ideas book is a real centerpiece of the OCP engagement. So it's a living document that captures and celebrates the community's contribution to the OCP. And by living, I mean it's growing. It's evolving and changing as we hear more feedback from the community. And it's really a critical piece of community engagement because it reports back to the community on how their participation was valued and how it contributed. So really the Ideas book is an example of that collaborate on the IAP2 spectrum because it looks to the public for innovation. The ideas are organized in the Ideas book according to sort of new, affirmed, or supplementary ideas. And the vast majority of ideas that we received are in the affirmed category, which makes us believe that we're on the right track as we've got sort of confirmation from the public that the OCP policy direction is heading in the right direction. So I'll spend the next couple of slides just talking about the communication efforts that we went into to promote the event. So in terms of print ads, there were 19 ads in 7 different publications. This is a large geographic area with many different publications. This is an expensive form of advertising, but also important and one that I think people really rely on. Social media, we had 73 ads in total over 4 platforms, quite a high engagement rate. And of course, you're always navigating there's a lot of content on social media. So trying to be heard in that is always a challenge, but I think that does quite well for us, especially with that sort of consistent branding that we're sort of trying to create. We had postcard created per Ideas Fair. I'd say mixed success with the postcards. It is quite challenging, and I can go into the challenges if that's of interest, but it is difficult with the Canada Post rural delivery system to really target your specific geographic area because the delivery routes do not follow our electoral area boundaries. I don't know why. And then, of course, we had posters, which many of the area directors helped us in distributing those to their communities. Really sort of simple, but useful thing to do. Plan your couch and platform. Again, really useful. There's a distribution list, so people can sign up to be on the distribution list, and then we'd send emails to let people know that events were happening. We have 534 people or email addresses that receive those distribution lists. And we can tell from the Plan Your Couch and platform that there's a strong correlation between the launch of the print and social media and visits to the site. So, we can see that we're having some effect on that. And finally, the grassroots direct communication, emails, right? Emails to stakeholders, emails to APCs, emails to area directors to sort of spread the word to as many people as we can. So next steps, local area plan events are being planned for the fall. So that's step one, that's already approved. We will give you the dates as soon as they are confirmed. And then also First Nations engagement, as I said, a separate report on that will be forthcoming. This staff report is for information, so there's no recommendation, but I'm here to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you. Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Garnett, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I participated, as did other directors, in some of these events, and I had the good fortune to go through Coxsila Village asking merchants if they would put up posters, and I know your colleague, Ms. Breen, knows merchants have expressed a desire to have their own. If the timing just didn't work. They're open when we had the Eagles Hall session, and I encourage staff to find it an opportunity to reach out to the merchants on both sides of the Trans-Canada in E and D to see if we can't get their feedback. It's one of those unique business hubs that we should probably get that feedback. So I can help, and I'm sure Director Nicholson will help me get something happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Deck.
I'm grateful that you sort of thought to include Area I in the U-Boat and Honeymoon Bay. That was really important. I think that was allowed a lot more of our retired residents to come and have their input or just get informed. But I'm also wondering, the Laketown Ranch development proponent was there with a display. I'm wondering how common that is for developers to piggyback on ideas fairs.
If I may, now you'll have to jog my memory on that, because
that was the most recent one.
I saw him there. I didn't see it.
Ms. Breen, can you come up to the mic, please?
We're not aware of him giving a presentation.
No, but he had a display and he had a table and handed out information.
Was that at our meeting in February?
Yeah.
We weren't aware of that.
Yes.
We did meet him there, but I didn't see him with a table.
He had a map and, yes.
So we missed that. We didn't see that. If that was at the February meeting, which would have been the 23rd.
You know what? We're post-public hearing, so I think we should be careful here.
Oh, sure. Sorry, I never thought of that.
Right, I didn't either. Okay. Ms. Cheryl told me.
Can I just add that for any development application, and any property owners, their lands are on the maps, right? So there's certainly that development as well as all others. They're featured and perhaps identified as special study area or any other things. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Director Wilson, and then Director Morrison, and then Director Morton.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Ali, and same to Coralie. Great work as always that you put up there. The living document thing, and you've kind of preempted me here because I had questions about the next steps, which you've already answered. Now we go back to a what-if scenario. The chair, Madam Chair, said when we had the presentation by the fire about the farm and some of the inclusion of the farmers into these kind of things in the OCP, which has been missing. And I think the chair mentioned that there was no money to include. Well, do we have any money left in here to maybe include the farmers as well, considering what we've had here?
Through the chair to the director, we're planning on bringing back another staff report specifically on additional meetings. So with a recommendation that, dependent on resources, staff would convene additional meetings. And our recommendation would be subject to budget 250.
Okay, good stuff. But you're basically, the answer is yes, you'll be including the farmers if we can.
Yes, we would include them under the scope of that.
Excellent, thank you.
Director Morrison.
Thank you, through to our fine staff. So what I found curious, and I think I got to 4 of those meetings, is there were some very persistent interest groups in attendance, and I think they were far outnumbered by the regular folk in our communities that came out. But there was some interesting exchanges, and one thing I noticed, that some of the messaging was pretty consistent from one meeting to the next from the interest groups. First question is, are we obviously we're taking their input and suggestions in, even though it was very, in some cases, very one track and linear and focused. But a curious thing happened at the one in my community in Honeymoon Bay, where I was approached by some folks from the development community who are they're not particularly thrilled because I guess this is a little uncertainty for them. Obviously, the development community is under a lot of pressure to get new houses built, and hopefully some affordable ones. But I think they're viewing this as a bit of uncertainty. It may result in more certainty later on, but there's uncertainty now, and now is when we're having the crisis. So has there been any thought about that by staff as to how we can ensure that we don't have the development community and builders going to other jurisdictions because we're in the midst of a process?
Thank you for the question, Director Morrison, if I may. Yeah, I think that is a good question. I mean, certainly the faster that we can bring forward a final OCP for the board's consideration, the better, although it has to be done, correctly, or as close to correct as we can, so there's that fine balance. The other element is the comprehensive land use or zoning bylaw. That's another critical piece, because without that in place, then that is a further step in that will, when adopted, facilitate, I think, the appropriate kind of development that we want to see. And I also know that there's, continual efforts to modernize our DS processes, and I think that's another significant step. So I don't have the exact answer for you, but I think that those 3 pieces together will address that problem as much as we can at this time. Yeah.
Thank you. Director Martman and then Director McClinton.
Can I have a follow-up, please?
Sure.
Just really quickly, if we've been listening to what we've been hearing at the province, there's a very good likelihood that if we're not done in time to get some certainty and regulations in place, that the province might do a little more and encourage us to make those regulations happen. So whether Ms. Chirulf or Ms. Breen may have some plan Bs in the event that we're not finished this process and we get told to make changes. Any thoughts on that?
To Director Morrison, through the chair, staff's monitoring very carefully the province's correspondence, and to date, there's still some vagueness in terms of specifically when local governments are going to be directed into what capacity, but certainly from the perspective of the MOCP, we're ensuring that the affordable housing policies are fulsome. We'll be coming back shortly with a staff report actually addressing affordable housing and some suggestions of what the directors could consider now, which relates to the new housing policy. What Ms. Garnett said with respect to the zoning bylaw is another component. And certainly if the province does, in fact, legislate that all residential zones must have secondary suites by the end of the year, then that's what will happen. But from the policy perspective, we're ensuring that the MOCP policy right now is consistent with provincial direction and has the flexibility to be consistent. I'd also, just as a follow-up on the previous, or your previous question, the question prior to this, I think the sooner, in terms of the MOCP, that the land use, for the certainty for all community members, that the land use designations and the growth containment boundaries can be adopted, the OCP, without the local area plans, which we anticipate to be another 2 years, probably the better in terms of the certainty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Martman.
Thank you, and I just want to bring up one item that comes up at least recently at our Ideas Fair, and that is around First Nations, and I think the collaboration or the input from First Nations, and we listened, or some of us that were at the recent Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities. There was a director, John Jack from the Bernie Claycock, that spoke. And he talked about, engagement, and that one of the things that he said was more than halfway, more than half the time. And I'm wondering if we have the capacity and the ability to meet that statement. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Mr. Jack, and he's an excellent person, and I think that's a really great aspiration. I would say that we don't have that capacity at this point. We have full good intention, but I think there are many different components on our work plan, many different demands on our time. So we do what we can, and the diversity of nations in this region make it, in my opinion, really wonderful and really challenging as well to meet that sort of standard. So we will keep working as hard as we can, but it is a balance of among other demands.
And so I think I want to sort of just channel Director McClinton and say, what can we do to support this? Thank you.
Director McClinton, you're up.
Just a quick comment. I just want to publicly acknowledge you, Ali, and Corley, and your team for hard work putting all this together. I've got a lot of positive feedback from residents in my area, and just a fantastic job, and I just looking forward to seeing what's next. So thanks for hard work on this.
Yes, we all concur. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? All right, thank you so much. So we're on to R4.
So R4 is a report from the Parks and Trails Division, re the Wessex Ravine Park Trail and Stairway Connection.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Megan Walker, Parks and Trail Planner. I believe Chase is bringing up my presentation. Thank you, Chase. I'm providing an introduction to item R4, which is the Wessex Ravine Park Trail and Stairway Connection. And I'm providing an update on the design and environmental assessment work that's been completed to date for the gas tax funded trail and stairway connection project through Wessex Ravine Park in Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay. There's been a long-standing community interest in improved pedestrian connectivity between the Upper Village and Lower Village areas in Cowichan Bay, which is currently limited to Wilmot Road and Cowichan Bay Road, primarily in the eastern end of the village. The 2013 Cowichan Bay Cowichan Community Parks and Trails Master Plan identified this as a priority issue and included a priority action of constructing a connection from Pritchard Road through Wessex Ravine Park to Cowichan Bay Road. The 2022 approved budget included $50,000 in gas tax funds for the design and environmental assessment of this connection, with an additional $396,131 for construction in 2023. The best identified location for this project is at the north edge of Wessex Ravine Park, in an area previously disturbed for a water main construction, an informal trail, and near adjacent development. However, this site is also within the provincially recommended setback from the largest great blue heron colony on Vancouver Island. This graphic is attachment B in your report. This is the current preliminary design concept that includes a staircase with viewing and resting platforms and a trail connection to Cowichan Bay Road. These are figures from the environmental review, which was also completed by consultants. That includes, that outlines the potential impacts to sensitive ecosystems and the heron colony. The review also notes design mitigations and further studies that may lead to reduced risk of negative impacts. However, because the birds can be unpredictable, some level of risk to the colony will likely remain, along with associated financial, legal, and public relation risks. For this reason, staff are making the following recommendation: that it be recommended to the board that the Wessex Ravine Park Stairway and Trail Connection Project not proceed at this time due to the unpredictable risk of impact to the existing great blue heron nesting colony adjacent to Wessex Ravine Park, and that measures be taken to limit informal access and use of this area of the park be approved. If this recommendation is approved, staff will continue to seek other options for meeting this important need of improved pedestrian connectivity in Cowichan Bay, and the gas tax funds could be reallocated to other projects. I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Director Abbott?
I'd like to offer an alternative recommendation, if I may, Chair.
Sure, just let me make sure there's no questions. Check the board here. All right, over to the director of the area. What would you like to do?
Thank you, staff, for the recommendation. I would like to offer a modified option 3 specifically, and I have circulated this to directors and legislative services. I would move that it be recommended to the board that the Wessex Ravine Park Stairway and Trail Connection Project proceed to construction in keeping with the preliminary designs commissioned by McCallany, incorporating reasonable, feasible, and practicable recommendations as offered in the most recent swell environmental review, along with the Cowichan tribe's comments received to date.
Do I have a seconder? I have a seconder. All right, discussion? Director Martman.
So, I'm digesting this. My question comes into liability, and I'm trying to understand. I think the swell environmental review mentions that there would be monitoring of the herons going forward, and I believe it's in there, and also that the potential of that if the heron is impacted negatively, that the province could take the CVRD to court. So is that something that the area director is willing to assume for his residents in terms of cost and managing?
I believe this area has been studied numerous times, most recently by swell, which in itself I question why we had to revert to another study upon studies. This started in 2008 when the old fish plant was demolished, a cannery condominium was planned, The water line is referred to by staff, went through numerous archaeological studies, environmental studies, impact on the heron rookery have been done. It's been championed, as you've heard today, from two rather concerned residents who live in close proximity. My predecessor, Loriani DiNardo, has moved vociferously to make sure that this rookery is a part of in the OCP as a part of the development permit. Yes, it is a concern, but we will not proceed if we're always scared by the potential of a litigation coming down from a higher level of government. However, at present, as we've heard from residents, there is a inclination for new pathways to substandard, haphazard paths that are beginning to migrate into the ravine farther upstream, and they are going to do more damage than the dedicated, concerted, well-planned, soft treaded structure that's going to go on top of an already disturbed area. I think this is the best method to control and direct traffic. And yes, I mean, we could, as a community, we could do nothing, and perhaps we would avoid the potential of a lawsuit and an embarrassing situation. But of all the areas, this particular area has been studied numerous times since at least 2008. And I think enough. The community is speaking. The community is speaking loudly and clearly that they want this connection. We as a board have talked about active transportation. We as a board want to get people out of their cars. This is the most direct way. Oh, and we as a board have improved numerous subdivisions, adding more residents upstream on this very sensitive part of land. It's time that we match that build out to a concerted and concentrated and well-directed route from the upper bench to the lower sea level, to the sea level. And I think we've heard passionately from residents, and you've just heard from two people that I encouraged to make a presentation. I've heard nonstop since this hit the public airwaves last Friday. Everybody on Pritchard Road, everybody that I saw on Sunday afternoon while I was walking, looking at the ravine with Loriani DiNardo, Carrie Talbot, to a person said, I want this to happen. There may be a few people. In fact, I used to live on that map that staff had up. I was the last property on Pritchard Road, and our property line was what is now Couch and Parks, our CBRD Parks. We were easily able to scramble down. Now, as of the weekend, I saw on top of the water line a yellow nylon rope that has been strung by active neighbors. That's their guideway up and down. It is happening. So this is a way to mitigate the impact. And these are resilient birds. They're in force right now. The skies are black. I tried to take a picture of the brand new washroom generating station in the boat launch, and I wonder what's up there. And the skies are aloft with herons. They are in this urban environment, in this built-up area, they're seemingly very adaptable to humans. And as Jane Kilday mentioned, they know what we look like. So let's let them see us at bridge level, at platform level, not directly underneath them on the west side of the ravine, as people are now doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Abbott. Director Acton. Oh, yes, please.
Thank you, and I certainly heard your community that came here and made my notes. And I hear the passion, and I do respect it. I'm not sure I heard an answer to whether the plan is to monitor these nests afterwards for impact, and whether your area is, or whether the expectation of, if there is a lawsuit, that it would be held by all of the CVRD, or whether this is something your area is willing to deal with on their own.
I think we'll turn to...
Let me deal with the latter.
No, I think we'll turn to staff for answers on that.
To answer your question about monitoring, one of the suggestions in the environmental review is to undertake additional baseline monitoring this will be for 2024 at this point, which would help provide additional information about how the herons react to people currently using the informal trail or otherwise entering the park, how they react to dogs or eagles or other presence in the environment, so that that form of the monitoring study may inform further management decisions or design mitigations. They also included a recommendation of ongoing monitoring once, if the stairs were built, just to see how the herons may be reacting in the, with the stairway actually in operation. But both of these actions would require additional funding.
Hang on a second. I have a question. Has this gone to the Kawatsan-Tamu Committee?
It has not yet been referred to the Kawatsan-Tamu Committee. That was a recommendation made by or a suggestion made by their lead referral coordinator to do so.
So that might be useful information for this discussion. Director Abbott?
It's more of a question to Director Marchman, but is it traditional at the board that we assign liability to regional areas or to different areas, or does the board take on liability issues as a board? And to the former, I think with monitoring, I've already reached out to the Nature Center, and volunteers are willing to participate in monitoring. I think we want to use professionals when we have to, and use a volunteer asset when we can as well. I think the proposed structure can have technology incorporated and gates to control access at times, and lock, and with good signage and education, lock access to the trail during the months that nesting is happening. At present, anecdotally, neighbors up in the Wessex area are talking about the eagle activity that works alongside with the herons, and on occasion there are baby herons that are taken away by eagles, but they seem to work they seem to work together.
Could I turn to Ms. Cheroff about the liability question?
I can respond to that.
Okay.
Okay, I can respond to that one. It's a shared risk. It's a board decision. It's a regional district risk. So anytime that CVRD deals with litigation matters, it is something that is dealt with by the regional district. We don't partition it out to individual electoral areas or individual functions of the regional district. So at the end of the day, it's a board decision, and the board resides with that decision.
Thank you. I'm just going to put the motion in front of me here. Hang on. Director McClinton has, oh yeah, Director Acton was next. I knew there was someone next.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Director McClinton. I've been down there, and it is really apparent that, well, first of all, I remember approving development permits for beautiful ocean homes all around there. And they had to follow environmental procedures to build their homes. And now to direct a trail and a staircase in a small area, it only makes sense because people are actually just building their own trails and cutting down all the brush and the laurel to get down whichever way they feel is safest. And they're traipsing everywhere, and like we saw in the pictures, they're right there underneath the nests, taking pictures. So then we can direct people on which way to go, have the trail, have nice signage that says don't get off the trail because you're going to disturb the habitat, and that this is a sensitive area. Most people want to follow the rules and get down safely. And I remember the design charrettes happening in Cowichan Bay. Some of the most important things were the view portals. So this is a huge view portal that was talked about, because having the ocean and seeing the ocean is a real challenge for many areas in Cowichan Bay. They talked a lot about safe walking access. They talked about parking, so yeah, this isn't going to solve any, well, I guess it makes people leave their cars at home instead of coming down to the village. And ocean access was a really big one. And this feels like the 11th hour. This is kind of, this has been, you know, in a plan for Area D for quite a while. And so I support the vision of the community, the previous director, it's funded, and the new director clearly sees that this is something that the community wants. That's all I have to say, but I totally support this happening, and we can do this in a safe way. Clearly, if we can build houses all around it. And I remember somewhere actually in that circle that shows their, what is it, 90 meters or 30 meters around from the nest. So, thank you.
Director McClinton.
Director Acton stole my thunder there. I agree with pretty much everything she just said, so I'll keep it quick. I know Director of the area, Director Abbott's been very thoughtful about his motion, and he's been speaking with his community members. I think it's, you know, very important as a board that we support each other, especially when it's reasonable and when the community wants reasonable things. Yeah, so I'll be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. I always shudder when I hear the liability word. It comes up far too often nowadays, and that's not meant as any disrespect to Director Martman, who's brought it up. It is an important aspect of this. But in this particular case, is that not why we pay our dues to the Municipal Finance, or rather Municipal Insurance Association? They cover us for this kind of thing? Anyone?
Would staff like to answer that? I mean, we're talking about herons, not liability, I think.
I know, but the liability came out if we are sued by the province, then that becomes under the liability part of it.
Right, I understand that, but we also would lose the herons if they actually came to that. So that's the bigger issue to me.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. But if we're going to talk about liability, let's say who's going to cover it. Is it going to be you? No, it's going to be all of us.
Director Martman.
You know, I too look at all the information, and I struggle with this because the one voice that's not at the table is the herons, and so it's not that, you know, I'm going to be looking for everybody to support me on issues that come forward from my area, and it's not that I'm against it. I hear safety issues, I hear that, but we've created this in so many ways, and now we're looking to mitigate something, and I still think the heron doesn't have a voice. And, you know, and I feel like Director Acton, in a way, like we're sort of pushed up against time envelopes, and we're doing things that are maybe with not all information. I think the chair has mentioned about not having First Nations input. And I struggle with this because I think the community's intention is honorable. I think they really would be horrified to have something happen to those nests, as all of us. And so I just don't know the way forward. I'm struggling with this, and you know, I'd love to just say, hey, I'm in all support for this, but I just don't. I just want to voice the angst that is with this kind of decision, and put that out there, because I think, you know, maybe the public isn't aware of the struggles that we have as directors on these things where they're just not so easy to come to a conclusion. So, but again, I just turn to the director for his, you know, his passion and his insights. So, thank you.
Director Acton.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, my first point is that I think we're actually making things worse by not building this trail. People are ruining the landscape. People are just using the banks, and they're going right up to the heron's habitat. Whereas if we have this trail, you're keeping it directed, and you can keep people off of traipsing around under the trees and continuing to build. So I think it's a win for the herons and for the community. And then my second point was about supporting the community and their vision and all that. We have to live together with nature, and I think this is a win. It's kind of, I'm really saddened that we're focused on it as being like that we have conflicting reports and information, so that we're questioning whether it should be happening or not. But to me, it's a win.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I have lived in this community since 1992, before any of these subdivisions were in. I lived on the edge of where my family owned a home, on the edge of where this, on the side of the ravine that does not have the nests at present. These are unbelievably resilient birds. I'm not a biologist, obviously, but the west side of the ravine, or where the nests are at present, is showing promise, and this despite despite clear cuts that came right up to their rookeries, and passionate land keepers like Jane Kilby, Lori Yanni DiNardo, Carrie Talbot. They were for years talking to this board about not allowing this to happen, and despite all of that, the birds are back in force. And I am somewhat comforted that this isn't, these are urban blue heron. They seem to have weathered and, as somebody said, acclimated. They've become habitualized to where they are living. I am confident, but I'm not a biologist. And I would just say, in conclusion, that this is a community connector that my community clearly wants. And we want to direct people in a safe manner from the upper bench to the lower bench, to the lower seaside level, and we want to participate in active transportation. We want to do it in a safe way. We are saying that we wish to ensure that this aligns with First Nations observations and desires and intentions, and this would go before First Nations for their input. But let's not do more reports to see if we can find an angle for this not to happen. I want to see this go through.
Thank you. I am wondering if this should be referred to the Quatsin-Timok Committee for comment before we make a decision. Would that be reasonable?
I would like to say that it happened concurrent, that we proceed and that the proposal go forth. This has been on the books for at least a decade.
Right, but it's nesting season, so we have a few months here.
It would not, fair enough, but it wouldn't, but I think we need to deal with the manufacturer that's going to build it. I don't want to hear that the money is going to be allocated for a potential walk down Wilmot Road. I want to see this, I want to see some teeth in the motion that it's going to proceed to happen. These things have a way, it'll take a while for the final drawings. All we have are preliminary drawings. While the final drawings are being worked on, we get the feedback from tribes. Don't forget, that water line required feedback from tribes. We've already looked and assessed the routing that this trail and network were to go. We've already disturbed the bank, and we've mitigated it. We've done the archaeological digs and assessments. We can go back to tribes, but we're going to get the same report.
What would you like to do, committee?
Well, we have a motion on the floor. I think we need to.
Have any more discussion?
Yeah.
That it be recommended to the board that the Wessex Ravine Park Stairway and Trail Connection Project proceed to construction in keeping with the preliminary designs commissioned by McElhaney, incorporating reasonable, feasible, and practicable recommendations as offered in the most recent swell and environmental review, along with Cowichan Tribe's comments received to date. So it is essentially going ahead, regardless of what Cowichan Tribes, if they don't want it to go ahead, is what the way I read this recommendation.
Yes. However, if between now and construction, which is going to happen 6 months from now, if Cowichan Tribes comes back with compelling evidence, we haven't broken ground yet.
Director Dett, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I needed to hear the motion.
Mr. Farquhar.
For clarity, Madam Chair, it would be pertinent to have included in the recommendation a specific referral to Cowichan Tribes if that's the intention of the committee. So it's clear for staff in terms of the process ahead.
I think it's been referred, this whole area has been referred often enough. I would proceed as the motion has been read. Tribes have already given in the documentation that we've been provided for this report today, we've heard their concerns, and we can address them.
We have a motion on the floor. Any more comments, discussion?
Yeah, sorry, I can't support, I'm unfortunate, I can't, and that, the issue is that I haven't seen the Cowichan Tribes respond. I've seen what they've written and saying that it would need further exploration, and that that was just a very preliminary response to a request. So I think there's outstanding information to be received. So I don't know if there's a way to amend this. Look to say that, whether it needs an amendment along with a referral to Cowichan Tribes before this would proceed.
So I believe there's a motion on the
Corporate
floor.
Secretary, yes.
So my suggestion would be to call the question if the motion fails and there's a revised motion that could then be forwarded. But if the motion passes, it passes. But there's currently a motion on the floor.
Yes.
Just for clarity, the CVRD owns this, it's not like a MOTI or, it's
Yes,
just parkland.
It's designated parks.
Yeah.
All right, any more discussion on the motion? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Director Martman and myself are opposed. Motion's carried. Next item.
The next item, R5, is a report from the Building Inspection and Bylaw Enforcement Division regarding fireworks discharge permits, referred from the April 12th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's no presentation, and the report is from the April 12th Committee of the Whole meeting, so it was referred to come back to ASC for discussion. So I'm just here for questions, and I think you wanted to have discussion amongst yourselves.
Thank you. I do have a question, though. I wanted clarification. Sorry. I missed the last discussion, so I would like clarification on what staff are recommending.
So there's a recommendation it's a two-part recommendation. The second part may even be the more important part. It's where the town of Lake Cowichan and town of Ladysmith would like to be removed from the bylaw.
Right,
So,
I get that.
yeah.
I think my question was, what are special events?
So that would be something just approved by the board. So
So it would be on private land, or it would
Wherever
be
you-
a public event? I guess is what I was wondering.
The bylaw really doesn't change other than you're removing the dates. So right now there are 3 dates that people can actually come and get up applications.
Right.
And then there's also a provision for special events. So if somebody wants to do something outside one of those dates, then it would come forward to the board to approve it. So now what we're saying is that the board would approve all of those, and you're in essence eliminating all fireworks with the exception if they came to the board and asked for approval.
Okay, I was sort of thinking maybe, okay, got it. Director Acton.
Thank you. I can say that my community is pretty much in support of banning fireworks. But their hesitation, or their, even in some case, some mockery to me, but that they're kind of questioning how can that be enforced? So, yeah,
To the chair,
I guess.
yes, as it's difficult right now to enforce it. It may make it easier in the fact that if it's outright banned, then everybody would know that. So as we've discussed before, is that the neighbors can be the people that provide us the evidence. And when everybody knows you can't have it, then if it's your next door neighbor letting it off and you don't like it, we'll get a call and then we'll be asking questions like, do you have any evidence, or will you stand in court and say, yes, you witnessed it?
Director Deck?
I wrote down that there's a part of this that says the staff will limit application of the bylaw to CVRD electoral areas. So can you, oh, I think I, okay. Get it?
I thought you would get that, yes.
Thank you.
That was part two.
Director Martman?
So I know in my area, this is a bit mixed. There's a bit of a, I don't know if we're the wild north, wild west, but there's a group of us that, it'd be nice just to be able to go do what we always did. But, with the impact on dogs, horses, cattle, herons, that's a joke. No, birds and everything, I think it's just one of those times and 3 years ago, we discussed this a lot and I brought that, the issue of trying to find a balance. 3 years later, I'm just at this, I think the same place that Director Acton was, because she was about 3 years in back then, going like, hey, can't you see this? This is where we're headed, it's going to a complete ban, and that's, it's just, people are doing what they want to do. And if we can't give bylaw enforcement the tools or the ability, then we're just stuck, I think, as a lawyer once said, bylaws without the ability to regulate them or enforce them. So, yeah, I guess I just would like to know if there's any appetite for an item 3, and that would be around education. Or is that another time that we'd make a referral to staff to say, how can we take a regional approach to educating and informing the citizens of CVRD about fireworks?
To the chair, to Director Martman. I'm not sure if you recall, but we had in the service review, the 4th recommendation in that service review was public education, and I would see this as being one of those highly on that public education piece.
Right. Okay. Any more discussion? Do we have someone moving the recommendation? Great. Great. We got a mover and a seconder. Okay, we're almost finished. Hang in there. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion's carried. All right, we did it.
Okay, so, Madam Chair, we don't have any unfinished business, but we did have new business, which was NB1, which was a grant and aid to be considered from area B. Shawnigan Lake. And I believe the director of the area has the wording for the resolution. Did you want to read it out?
Okay, don't put me on the spot. Here we go.
If not, I can do it.
Here we go. That it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid electoral area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $500 be provided to Francis Kelsey Secondary School Dry Grad, be approved in principle, subject to Finance Division's review, i.e. if we have enough money in Area B's bank account.
Do I have a seconder? Great. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion's carried.
Madam Chair, the next item on the agenda is question period.
Do we have any questions? Phew.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the CVRD board, and those participating online. My question today is regarding the provision of getting food to the people, so produce to the people outside of agricultural lands. Particularly, I noted in R23 item F and item B, the provision for food trucks and mobile food vending, as well as community garden projects. And I'm just wondering how we might go about finding out more about if that's possible.
Well, I think that's input that you can provide to your modernized official community plan.
Okay.
So go to the plan
Go to
your
the
couchin
website.
and submit it.
Okay. And my next question is regarding the Plan Your Cowichan and Ideas Fair outreach. And I'm wondering if billboards were ever considered, because we'd like to capture the commuter population. And as proud as we all are of the engagement that was accomplished during that phase, I think it could be better. And so I'm wondering how, or maybe if you could shift the money spent on postcards and maybe look at billboards. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that back to the staff.
That's my question.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We can move into a motion to adjourn.
I believe we can.
Is
I
that
don't
right?
believe there's any other questions, and so, yeah, looking for a motion to it.
I got a motion, seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.